Okay, welcome everybody to the Kohelet project. I don't know if it's got a real name. Has it got a real name? What's it called?
Perfect.
Is it called the Kohelet project?
Perfect.
Have I just named it?
Yeah.
I've just named it. It's called the Kohelet project.
Somebody else wants to name it.
Okay, well, I don't know why Kohelet. You'll have to ask Shoshana that. It was her idea. What we're going to do this morning is I'm going to hand over in a second to Shoshana Baker, whose brainchild this was. And she's going to explain the nuts and bolts of actually how we're going to learn Kohelet all together. Then I'm going to give an introduction to Kohelet. And then at the end of that, hopefully we will have whetted your appetites enough for you to sign up to learn some or all of Kohelet and to join in the project. The idea being that we shall finish this on Hoshana Rabbah. But I won't steal Shoshana's thunder. I'll ask Shoshana now to tell you all what the story is, and then I'll carry on. Shoshana, there you go.
So first of all, good morning and Shavua Tov, and it's amazing to see so many faces here around the table and on Zoom. And it goes without saying that obviously our learning today and our learning throughout this project is in all, for a speedy return home of our hostages, for the recovery of all our psuim, for the safe return of all our chayalim, and just Bisuro Tovot. The reason, I guess this idea that was percolating in my head was that I started to think about October 7th, and I started to think about Shmini Atzeret, and I wondered how personally I was going to cope. And thank God, really, Baruch Hashem, I've had the mental bandwidth to even think about this, because despite the fact that I have two soldiers and in the thick of what's happening, it doesn't touch my Dalet Amot in the sense where, thank God, I haven't had any trauma personally, very personally, to deal with. But okay. And for me, these last 10 months have been a real roller coaster, as I'm sure they have for many people. And for me, to ground myself in Emunah and Chizuk has to come from the text. It's the only place I can go to, and it grounds me. And I thought maybe perhaps if we could do something as a community to represent the Achdut that we are missing today so much, and do some type of communal learning. And then when we looked at the calendar and looked at the amount of time that we have, I first said to Rabbi Lieberman, maybe we can learn Tanakh as a community. And he sort of laughed and said, I think that's a little too ambitious. And then I realized that we read Kohelet on Sukkot. And I thought, wow, maybe actually that's something that is achievable. It's 12 prakim, and we have about 6-7 weeks. And then I also thought, Kohelet is one of these really hard Sefer or Megillot that most of us find very tedious. If we are in Shul on Shmini Atzeret, probably a lot of people do fall asleep during Kohelet. People don't understand it. And I thought maybe given this time when the questions of theodicy and the questions of where is God and questions of the world, that Kohelet address is actually a perfect segue for us to jump into and to prepare us emotionally for what will come with the with the Yamim Tovim in Tishrei. And so that's the idea. So we were trying to figure out how to make this happen. And what we'll do is there are Excel spreadsheets that have been created for the different communities within Netanya. So the Young Israel of North Netanya, the Young Israel of Kohelet, Tfilat Yamim, I'm not remembering the name of the show correctly, but in Kiryat HaSharon, Rabbi Hershkovitz. Shevet Achim, thank you. And am I missing somebody? oh, and SNAP, sorry, are all participating in this project. What? Yes. And so each community has its own Excel spreadsheet. And if you want to take ownership of studying a parak independently, you can do that. And on the Excel spreadsheet are also sources that we've provided that you can go into a podcast or share to learn that specific parak. We thought it'd be very helpful, which Rabbi Lieberman has agreed to do, to provide an introduction to Kohelet. And then during the time period on Sunday evenings, we're going to have different speakers who will address the overall themes of Kohelet, because there are many, many themes. And hopefully that will give you a greater feeling, a greater understanding, greater depth for all these challenges that we're both facing today, and that clearly Shlomo HaMelech was dealing with at that time period, if we believe that Shlomo HaMelech was the author, which is probably one of the things that we'll address as we study Kohelet. And hopefully we can all come together on Hoshana Rabbah, the evening before Shmini Atzeret, and commemorate, celebrate, mark the day in a way that hopefully we can acknowledge the tragedy, but also hold in the same time the simcha. And that's more or less how this came to be. So I hope that answers the questions.
Each community has a point person.
Oh, yes. And each community has its own point person. If you want to get all the information, there is a WhatsApp group. I know people don't want to be on any more WhatsApp groups, but it's the only way to share information for the Kohelet project. So all the Zoom links will be there. The Excel spreadsheets will be there. Any notifications, changes, anything that you need will be in that WhatsApp group. So I would urge you all just to join that group so that you can stay on top of the information. If you need a link to that group, we'll put it on the different shul WhatsApp groups so that you can join. Or if you need to if you want to personally contact me, or you want to contact SD, that would be also help, to facilitate your process. We can do that as well. Anything else? Okay, so let's dig in.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shoshana, and thank you for the idea and the concept of learning together for our benefit, to make some kind of commitment, some kind of positive actions to represent our feelings and to mark what is going to be a very, very difficult Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah. I'm sure you'll all agree with me that I think in our lifetimes anyway, Simchat Torah is never going to be the same again. And we have to get used to a new reality. And I think that what Shoshana has brought together here, an idea that we're all going to be learning together, is something which is very positive, because, of course, we've seen it a billion times. Yachad nenatzeach, together we will have a victory, we will win. And togetherness includes learning together. And I think it's an excellent project. I don't know if Shoshana mentioned it. I just nipped out to get some drinks for the table. I missed a couple of minutes, but we did a similar sort of thing for Yirmiyahu last year, which was a nationwide thing. It wasn't just in Netanya, and it was very successful. People found that very useful learning exercises. So it's sort of based on that idea. So Kohelet. My job today is to give an introduction to Kohelet and to try and whet your appetites so that you fancy doing it. So I'm going to tell you a little story of my own, really, regarding Kohelet. But first of all, I want to ask you all a question. Who knows when Google was first introduced? What year? Okay, Philip says 2004. Anybody else got any ideas? When was Google first introduced to our lives? Few shrugging shoulders here. Hannah says in the 90s. Okay, there were search engines before, but we didn't really know about them, did we? Maybe you did because you were dead techie, but okay. Anyway, it was 1998. Okay, Google was introduced in September 1998. Okay, now the next question is, who can remember life before Google? What did you do if you needed information? You went to a library or you went to an encyclopedia, and it was very difficult to get information. Now, why am I telling you that? It's because I don't know the exact year, but it was definitely before 1998. And I suspect it was probably the late 80s, 89, maybe 1990. I had a very, very interesting friend who was a very bright fellow, member of Mensa, a little strange, but he was a very bright fellow. And it was an interesting guy. And he said, come on, let's learn Kohelet together. I think we must have been sitting together on Sukkot and reading this. And he said, come on, let's learn Kohelet together. So we started learning Kohelet together, and we gave up very quickly because it was just too difficult. It was miserable. We didn't really know what was going on here. Why is it in the Tanakh at all? And of course, pre-Google, I've asked a question about pre-Google, couldn't go onto Google and look for a podcast or a shiur or anything. We'd have to go and look it up. So, okay, we tried. We went to the Jewish bookstores and looked for Pirush on Kohelet, and we found one. We found an art scroll on Kohelet. Okay, it was a fair place to start, but it didn't really. Anyway, we gave up pretty quickly, and then we went and learned something else. And that was the last time that I attempted to learn Kohelet in any way other than just read it rapidly on Sukkot. So it's a difficult book. Today we've got Google, and actually there's tons of stuff out there. And I did a little bit of prep for this shiur, and there is so much to say about Kohelet. There is so much to learn from Kohelet that in some ways it's a bit overwhelming that there is so much to learn, because you can read a little piece on Kohelet and you think, wow, that's fabulous. Must remember that. And then you read something else and you think, that's completely different, and that's also fabulous. Must remember that as well. And you can get a bit overwhelmed by the whole thing. So what I'm going to recommend is that during your learning, that you aim to come away with 1, max 2 takeaway messages from Kohelet, because you'll all have different ones. And at the end, when we come together for our Siyum Bezrat Hashem on Hoshana Rabbah, we will hear everybody's, or maybe not everybody's, because we won't have time for that, but we'll hear a selection at least of the messages that you have learned, what you are taking away from Kohelet. And so it will be fascinating, I think, to see how everybody brings together what they're learning from Kohelet. So the first thing I want to say in introduction is, who was Kohelet? Okay, how do you know that it was Shlomo HaMelech?
Because he writes, and he could have been another son though, because he had more than one son, David. Divrei Kohelet ben David.
Okay, so Philip says, Divrei Kohelet ben David melech b'Yerushalayim. So that tells us that these are the words, Divrei, these are the words, Kohelet, of this person called Kohelet, who was ben David, and who was a melech b'Yerushalayim. Okay, so there was only one son of David who was king in Yerushalayim, and that was Shlomo HaMelech. But what else did Shlomo write?
Shir HaShirim.
Shir HaShirim, and what else? Mishlei, Shir HaShirim and Mishlei. Now, we haven't got time for me to show you everything, but take it from me that in both Shir HaShirim and Mishlei, Shlomo is mentioned. You will not find Shlomo mentioned in Kohelet. Okay, that's one question we need to consider. Why is Shlomo's identity shrouded in a bit of mystery.
Because he didn't want to.
Right. That was not a question for you to answer right now, Philip. Okay, it's a question for you to consider at some point. Right. So that's question number one. There is some discussion about who wrote Kohelet. Divrei Kohelet. These are the words of Kohelet, meaning that after that first introduction, these are the words of Kohelet, of Shlomo Melech. But who wrote the book? Various different opinions. It was the last book to be introduced into the canon, meaning it was the last book that was introduced into the Tanakh. How many books of Tanakh are there? 24, 27. Okay, 27, I think. Anyway, it was the last one which was introduced, and there was a big machloket between the rabbis as to whether it should be introduced or not. There were two books, interestingly, both written by Shlomo HaMelech, which were the subject of great debate as to whether they should be in or out of the Tanakh. The other one was Shir HaShirim. Shir HaShirim, you can understand why that was debatable whether it should be in, because on the face of it, it's an erotic love poem. Okay, what's that got to do with our Tanakh? We know that Shir HaShirim is understood as an allegory between the love between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Bnei Yisrael. But there was discussion about whether it should be in or out. Now, Kohelet was even more disturbing, because if you look at the second pasuk, the first real pasuk of Kohelet, it tells you what it's all about. Havel havalim amar Kohelet. Havel havalim hakol havel. We all know what that means. We've heard it many, many times. Vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity, says Kohelet, and then he repeats it. Everything is vanity, hakol havel. Now, that is not a particularly inspiring start to a book of Tanakh. And if you go through Tanakh, if you go through Kohelet very superficially, it's very easy to feel what? Depressed. Yes, you could feel depressed. Everything. Kohelet, he says, I've done it all. I've been a king. I have amassed wealth. I've amassed millions of wives and slaves and money. Sorry, I've got a phone call I have to get rid of. Oh, where's Zoom gone? There you go, you're back again. Right. I've amassed all this wealth. I've amassed all these people that are under my control. And Hakol Havel. It's all nothing. It's all futile. The whole thing is futile. And if you read through superficially, it's a very depressing book.
Yes.
But actually, when you look at the structure of Kohelet very carefully, and I'm sure that you will come across this in your learning when you look at the individual chapters, there are 7 times in Kohelet where the misery and the depression is punctuated by a concept of simcha, of joy. Okay? And 7, of course, is an extremely important number in Judaism. 7 is the number which completes everything. 7 days of the week before Shabbat, 7 years of Shemitah before Shemitah, 7 Shmitot before Yovel. 7 is a very holy number. Okay? And of course, Hoshana Rabbah is 7th day. Sukkot. So, and of course, Kohelet is connected with Sukkot, because we say Kohelet on Sukkot. It's part of we have Pesach, we say Shir HaShirim. Shavuot, we say Rut. Tisha B'Av, we say Eicha. Purim, we say Esther. And Sukkot, we say Kohelet. So that's one of the other questions that we have to ask and answer at a later date, is what's the connection between Sukkot and Kohelet? We'll come to that. So if you look at this structure, and you'll see it as you go along, that you have this whole area of misery, of depression, of saying everything is vanity, everything under the sun is vanity, and there's nothing new under the sun. I've seen it all. And I'm telling you, this is the musings of an old man who's on his deathbed, basically. And he said, you know what? My whole life has been futile. And that's a really depressing approach. But if you look carefully, that's not what he's saying. Because in between this misery, punctuated 7 times, is this concept of simcha. And Rabbi Sachs points out the numbers. I just need to remember the numbers. I can't remember the numbers off by heart now. He gives us the numbers of how many times the word simcha or the number of times it is used in all the books. Here we go. The root simcha, the root samach mem chet, meaning simcha. How many times do you think you'll find that in Sefer Bereshit?
Simcha.
Once. Okay. How many in Shmot? Once. How many in Vayikra? Once. How many in Bamidbar?
Once.
Very good, Fab. You're learning. How many in Dvarim?
Once.
Once.
No.
That
12 times in Dvarim. 12 times in Dvarim. Okay. And in Kohelet, how many times is Simcha mentioned? We talk about Kohelet being a miserable book. How many times is Kohelet mentioned? It is mentioned. How many times in Kohelet is Simcha mentioned?
7.
17.
17.
How many times in the whole of the Torah? Count it up. 4 in the first 4, plus 12 in Dvarim, 16. Not a coincidence, is it? Well, maybe it is. I don't think it's a coincidence. In Kohelet, the word simcha or the root simcha is 17 times, once more than in the whole of the Torah. So don't tell me that Kohelet is a miserable book. It's all about simcha. The question is, how is that simcha to be understood amongst all the other, superficially at least, miserable parts of Kohelet? You have these 7 references, very carefully structured here. He interrupts his theme with a reference to Simcha 7 separate times. Now, we have to just understand what is Simcha. How do you translate Simcha into English?
Joy.
Joy. Okay, joy is a good translation.
Happiness.
Very good, Hannah. I was hoping that somebody would say that. Is joy and happiness, that's not the right construction, is it? Are joy and happiness the same thing?
No.
No. Okay, right.
Joy is an evolution of happiness.
All right. Okay. Joy. Let me. I need to repeat this for because they won't be able to hear you. So I need to repeat what it said. Philip says, joy is an evolution of happiness. What do you mean by that, Philip?
Me to say you're happy, like I am now. But when I listen to you, I become joyful.
I can understand that. Can I have a sensible answer now? The difference between joy and happiness.
Joy is a momentary thing, and joy and happiness is an ongoing.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so Hannah says that joy is a momentary thing, and happiness is an ongoing state. Okay, how would you say happiness in Hebrew?
Osher.
Osher with an
Aleph.
Osher with an aleph. The most famous use of that word, Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha. Happy is the man, happy is the person, not necessarily a man. Yoshvei Veitecha. Happy is the one who sits in your house. Okay, that is taken as a reference to the house of God. Okay. Just before we started this shiur, Hannah was saying that when she was younger, she was jealous of the men. She wanted to be a man who could sit in kollel all day long and learn. And she said, Baruch Hashem, now that her children are older and are no longer quite so needy of her, She now has the time, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given her all these shiurim that she runs from one to the other all day long, and she's learning all day long. She is Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha. And that is a state of happiness. But joy, simcha, is not happiness. Happiness is something which is a very difficult state to achieve. And this is what Shlomo HaMelech is talking about in Kohelet. We are living in a society in the 21st century, and going back, I suppose, to the middle of the 20th century, I think probably began post-war and then really took off in the 60s. We live in a world where we are, number one, feel entitled to happiness. Number two, we are bombarded with, and certainly since 1998 and a little bit before, when the internet first started coming, and we can't get away from it, bombarded with adverts about how to be happy, and the concept that if you are not happy all the time, then there must be something wrong with you. We are living in this society where happiness, the state of happiness, this utopia. What does utopia mean?
Perfection.
What does the word EU means?
European Union.
No, EU as in utopia, euthanasia.
Good.
It means pleasant, okay?
Ah.
Euthanasia, for example, thanatos is death. So euthanasia is a pleasant death. Utopia is a pleasant existence. And what do we talk about when we say the word utopia? We use it in a word in a meaning that it's not really achievable, is it? It's a utopian idea. If you said that's a utopian idea, it means it's not really grounded in reality, because the reality of life is that it is not utopian. It is not all happiness. And that is what Shlomo HaMelech is coming to teach us in Kohelet. This is the headline message, if you like, of the overall book of Kohelet, as I see it. There are lots and lots of different ways of looking at it, of course, and then you'll all come up with your own ideas. But as an introduction, the idea that we have that we're meant to live in this state of osher with an aleph, this state of happiness, this state of utopia, all of the time, is not realistic. It's a utopian idea. It's not achievable. And what happens when you aim for something which is not achievable? Inevitably, you will fail. And that brings with it feelings of despondency, right? You feel sad because you've tried something and you've failed. And this is the problem that we have in today's society. If ever there was a time when the book of Kohelet is relevant, it is our society today, where we are bombarded with adverts about how to look beautiful with Botox and all that other stuff and hair transplants.
Work for you.
No, I've long since given up, right? All this idea that we have to look beautiful, our lives have to be beautiful, we have to have everything rosy in the garden, and if not, then we are a failure. I spoke about this, I can't remember the context in which I spoke about it, but I mentioned in one of the talks that I gave here about the poster that we saw when we first went into the Aliyah office, when we were thinking about making Aliyah. And what was interesting is, after I said this, so many people from around the world contacted me and said, we saw that poster too, and thought it was odd. You go in the Aliyah office, and what is the poster there? It's a poster of a horrible garden there, a scrubby patch of land with thorns and thistles all over, and one little rose there, one little red rose. And it says, the caption is, "We never promised you a rose garden." Right? And we all thought, what a weird thing. This is meant to be encouraging you to make Aliyah. You've got, you should have a beautiful picture of Netanya Beach, or the Kotel, or some happy little child there with his lovely little payers with a great big smile on his face and a chumash in his hands. That's what you should find in an Aliyah office, right? Or Tel Aviv in the nightlife, if that's what takes your fancy. But what, we never promised you a rose garden? No, because life is not a rose garden. And that's what Kohelet is telling us. Kohelet is telling us life is not a rose garden. And despite the fact that many of us, all of us, I think, here made Aliyah. Anybody here native Israeli? No native Israelis. Okay, so we all made Aliyah. And probably most of us saw that picture, or if we didn't see it, we understood that it wasn't that wonderful here all the time. It's their difficult life. If you came here as a youngster, as Hannah did, then it's hard to make a living, right? It's tough. If you come as older people, like, most of us, I think, it's hard to learn the language, right? For all of us, it's hard to get to grips with the personality and the bureaucracy and the banks and the post office and the 4 weeks for a letter to get from here to Tel Aviv. These are things that it's not a rose garden. Life is not a rose garden. Life is tough. Okay, it can be tough. For many people, it's very tough. For Baruch Hashem, for many of us, it's not as tough as for others, but it's still not perfect. There is no utopian life. And the idea in today's society, and this is why, by the way, the highest rate ever of teenage suicide since records began, and it's increasing every single year. In the Western world, teenage suicide is growing year on year. And the reason for that is because of this concept that everything has to be wonderful. And if you're not wonderful, if you aren't the perfect person, and if your life isn't the perfect life, then life is not worth living. And the antidote to that is Kohelet. That is what Kohelet is coming to teach us. He's coming to teach us that, yes, you may see, there may be times in your life where you see that Hakol Hevel, everything is just not working. It's futile. I'm working hard to do whatever I do, and it's just not working. We've all had times like that in our lives, in whatever particular thing it may be with Parnassa, wherever you turn, it's just working for you. Maybe with Gidul Banim, bringing up your kids, you try your best and it doesn't work out. Or whatever it is in your life, in your job, you work and you try your best and it just doesn't go for you. I'm sure you all know somebody that fits this category. I'm thinking of a particular person. A good person, a really good person. No matter what he tried, the Shlomasel never worked out for him, right? Whatever it was, he decided he was going to sell Betamax. VHS came along and booted it out, right? Decided he was going to sell video recorders. DVDs came along and whatever he did, it just didn't work out through no fault of his own, right? That's what Kohelet is telling us, that sometimes life is like that. But 7 times he punctuates this idea that life is tough and life is in somehow futile and your efforts are futile with this punctuation 7 times with simcha. Not osher, not happiness, but simcha. Simcha is, as Hannah said absolutely correctly, simcha is a point of joy. It's what did you exactly say? What did you say? It was momentary. That was the word. It's a momentary thing. Think about this for a moment, right? Think about this for a moment. We had here in this community a massive tragedy. On the 7th of October, one of our boys here was thought to have been kidnapped. Turns out, much, much later, he was actually killed on the 7th of October. But at the time, we thought he was a hostage. Itai Chen, Hashem Yikam Damav. Itai Chen was a beautiful boy of 19. Just last summer, I called him up on that bima there to give him an aliyah before his giyus, before he enlisted, and everybody wished him hatzlacha and briut, and everybody was full of good wishes for him. And he and his father stood on that bima together, and his father gave him a bracha. On the 7th of October, it's all over. At that time, we thought he was a hostage. Didn't know if he was dead or alive. 1 week later, the Shabbat afterwards, was his brother's bar mitzvah. The only reason he was on duty down there in the south on the 7th of October was because he swapped. That should have been his Shabbat off. He swapped Shabbat so that he could have the following Shabbat off to be at his brother's bar mitzvah. And at that bar mitzvah, which we didn't have here because we were too small, but because the place was too small, because everybody wanted to come. Everybody wanted to be there at that bar mitzvah to give support to the family. So we had the bar mitzvah over at the big shul at Chabad, and that was overflowing. No, that wasn't even big enough. But what was amazing was this amazing family chen, because they managed to have that momentary joy on the 14th of October, on Shabbat Bereshit, at their son's Chagai, I think his name is at his bar mitzvah, right? Were they happy? No, they were not happy. They were very, very far from happy. Was anybody happy in that room? Nobody was happy, but everybody was joyful. That is the difference between joy and happiness. Joy is momentary. Joy is momentary. And that is what Kohelet is trying to tell us. Kohelet is trying to tell us that for many people, even for Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest person ever, he says all that wisdom, waste of time. Hakol hevel. All that money, waste of time. Hakol hevel. All those wives and concubines, definitely a waste of time, right? Hevel, right? Hevel. What's worth it? Simcha. Punctuate. If you are fortunate enough to punctuate your life with moments of simcha, that is what you have to do. That is what you have to grasp hold of. And that is what Kohelet is telling us. And the 7 times is very significant because 7, as we said earlier, is a very chashuv number. It's a very important number. It's a very Jewish number. It's a very holy number. Okay, there is only one thing which is me'al hateva, one thing which is above nature, and that is one more than 7. Even you can do that, Philip. 8. 8. Okay, what do we do on the 8th day? Brit Milah. Brit Milah is above nature because a natural situation is for no parent to allow a Brit Milah on their child. You've all probably been through it. If you've had a boy, you've been fortunate enough to be able to have children and had a boy, you'll have been through it. It's a tough gig, right? Because you see this little baby and don't listen to anybody that tells you it doesn't hurt. It does, not much, but it does. And the baby cries. And as a mother, particularly a mother, even as a father, you feel that pain. But you do it because it's me'al hateva. It's something which we go above that because what is above nature? Above nature is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us that that's what we have to do, and that's what we do. Anybody tells you, asks you the question, why do we circumcise our children? Don't start telling them it's because it's healthy and because there's less cancer and this and that and the other. That's not the reason we do Brit Milah. We do Brit Milah because God says so. End of. That's it. Because it's me'al hateva. But Sheva, the number 7, is the number of nature. It's the number that we and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are together. Only Brit Milah is above that relationship. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks us to do something beyond. But the Sheva is something natural. 7 days of the week is a natural thing. It's natural for us. After 6 days, you have to do your work the 6 days, and then the 7th day is L'Hashem Elokecha. That's the 7th day. 7 years of Shemitah, then the 6 years of sowing, etc. 7th year is Shemitah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. 7 Shmitot, and then Yovel. 7 is a very significant number. So these 7 punctuations of joy is the completion. 7 is the completion. Right? We complete the week, we complete the cycle, we complete the supra cycle. Sheva is a completion. If you can punctuate your life, your complete life, with occasional moments of joy, and you can grasp hold of those moments, That is the antidote to all the rest of the hevel, all the rest of the futility, all the rest of the shtuyot that our lives are filled with, the petty arguments, right? When you have a simcha, okay, let's say you're making a wedding, right? Anybody here made a wedding? Yeah, hands up if you have made a wedding. All of us have made a wedding.
I have.
You've not made a wedding yet. Please God, you'll make a wedding one day. Hands up, those of you who made a wedding without any single ferrible with somebody, that somebody didn't get upset about something. You didn't invite them, or they weren't invited on the right time, or they weren't on the right table, or you didn't. Nobody, because there's always something that spoils the simcha. Okay, and that is what Kohelet is telling us. The rest of it is hevel. It's vanity. It's futility. It's nonsense. What's important in life is the simcha. And your life will only be punctuated with simcha. This is what Kohelet is telling us. You will not have a life full of osher, of happiness from start to finish. It doesn't exist. What does exist is moments of simcha. And if you had to summarize the message of Kohelet, it would be a word which is difficult to translate into English. It's a Yiddish word. Chaperein. Okay? Chaperein, which means
Carpe diem.
grasp hold of it when you can. Chaperein, right? If you get a moment of nachat, right? If one of your grandchildren is having a siddur party in their gan, right? And you've got something to do, you've got, I don't know, a hairdressing appointment, or you've got to take the car for an MOT. Stuff it. Go to the siddur ceremony, because that is a point of simcha that you have to grasp hold of. You have to chaperein every single moment of simcha, because life is tough. That is what Kohelet is telling us. Kohelet is not telling us life is tough, it's miserable, you're born, you live, you die, finished, miserable. No, he's not saying that. That's what it looks like. But when you look carefully, what he's saying is, this was I read this particular sentence in I can't remember exactly where I read it, but it's a beautiful sentence. It said Kohelet is teaching us to embrace the temporary nature of life. And that's where the word hevel comes in. Hevel we've translated so far as meaning vanity, futility, emptiness. What does the word hevel actually mean? Hannah says steam. Any other offers? Vapor. Okay, that's a good translation. Any other translations? Ephemeral. Okay, what? Ephemeral what? Yes, you did it. Ephemeral breath. Hevel means breath. It means a shallow breath. The word hevel means a shallow breath. Very interestingly, Rabbi Sachs talks about this, and he says that in Hebrew, and he says also actually in Greek, I'll take his word for it, and in the Hindu language, whatever that is, I can't remember what it is now. Hindi, I suppose so, yeah. And various other cultures, the word for soul has got to do with breathing. Let's just take Hebrew, okay? What is the word for soul in Hebrew?
Neshama.
Neshama, which
Linshom,
comes from
breathe.
linshom, to breathe. Another word for soul in Hebrew. Nefesh. What does nefesh mean?
To
A
breathe
deep
in.
breath. Nefesh means a deep breath, okay? Hevel is a shallow breath. And what Kohelet is telling us with this word hevel, he seems to be obsessed with death. If you look at through Kohelet, one of the themes that you see coming over all the time is death.
Dying people have shallow breath.
Correct. And what he's saying is that the difference, if you like, between life and death is ephemeral. It's a shallow breath. If you have a shallow breath, you're still alive. If you stop having even a shallow breath, you're no longer alive. So the idea of hevel, how many times is hevel mentioned in Kohelet? Have a guess.
Oh, many times.
A lot. Very good. Yes, that's a good answer. Anyone want to have a guess?
17.
17? How many? 40. You said 50 first time, I think. 40? 72? Okay, 37 is the answer. 37 points in Neville. He got closest. Right. 37 times. So it's clearly an important word. So it's important that we understand what Hevel means. Hevel does not, one sec, Hevel does not mean just vanity. It can mean vanity, but it also means that precious moment where we realize that we are alive. And when do we feel most alive? When we have not happiness,
Joy.
joy, right? We feel most alive when we have that moment of joy. So far from being a depressing work, if you look carefully and you scratch the surface of Kohelet, which hopefully we're all going to do when we look at very carefully at each perek, you'll find that with the help of the Mefarshim that you can read around, you'll find that the real message of Kohelet is an urging of us by an old man at the end of his life, a life which has been full and fuller than we could ever imagine. None of us are going to be king of Israel. None of us are going to have 1,000 wives. I can say that fairly confidently. None of us are likely to be as wealthy as Shlomo Melech, and none of us are going to be as wise as Shlomo Melech. He's a wise man in Kohelet at the end of his life, and he's saying it's almost like he's saying to his children, Kindalach, Chaparain, children, grasp every moment of joy, true joy, not superficial nonsense happiness that we're told to go seeking after in our world, but true joy. If I was to ask, I'm not going to do it because it would take too long, but think about it yourself on the way home when you've got 5 minutes to yourself. The next time you have 5 minutes on your own, I want you all to think, close your eyes and think of the time in your life that you felt the most joyful in your life. I'm going to tell you when mine was. I can tell you very clearly when mine was. The wedding of my oldest son, my first son's wedding. I remember at the end of that, we were sat, Elisheva and I, and a couple of the other kids, we were sat in the flat that we were staying in Johannesburg, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I said, I do not want to go to bed. I don't want this day to end. I want to get this day and put it in a flask and bottle it up and like a perfume, open it up every now and again and have a little sniff of this joy. That's what Kohelet is telling us. Those are the moments that you have to savor. Okay?
Okay.
Not cocaine, no. That's exactly what Kohelet is saying is vanity. Okay? Hevel havalim. Those superficial nonsense, that's hevel havalim. What we are talking about here is true joy. Those moments in your life, and hopefully there'll be many of them. There may only be a few, but whatever they are, and what you've got to look out for them. Don't miss them. That's what Kohelet is saying. He's saying life is short, it's tough, it can be full of nonsense if you allow it to be, but Hevel Havalim is not the message. The message is that simcha. So for me, the overriding message that I see as an overview, as an introduction to Kohelet, is that we have to find those moments of joy, those momentary points in time where we transcend everything that was going on. Imagine we were sat in the Warsaw Ghetto, chas v'chalila. You imagine in the Warsaw Ghetto when there was a wedding taking place or a child was born and there was a Brit Milah. What kind of life was that child likely to have? And yet there would have been a moment of simcha. There would have been a moment of simcha when that glass was broken under the chuppah and we remembered the churban and then we said Mazal Tov. Even in the Warsaw Ghetto. I don't know if they had weddings in Auschwitz, but if they did, it would have been the same thing, right? It would have been the same thing. Because even in a place and a time where it's tough, and we're in a tough time now, there's no question about that. We are in a tough time. It's hard for all of us. But if family came on the 14th of October, where they didn't know whether their son was alive or dead and what was happening to him, were able to stand there in shul and celebrate that moment of simcha, then so can we. We can take that simcha, and this is the message of Kohelet. Do not pass over those moments of simcha. It is those moments of simcha that suffuse the rest of the Hevel Havalim, and it's a very fine line. It's Hevel. It's that shallow breath, that difference between life and death, that difference between joy and misery is a very fine line. And you can miss it. If you blink, you miss it. Nobody ever had on their gravestone, he went to work early and came home late. Nobody put that on their gravestone. What they said was, he was a good father. She was a mother who always had time for her children. These are the moments of joy, of simcha, that Kohelet is telling us about. There's a time to dance. There's a time to cry. There's a time to laugh.
Yeah.
There's a time to cry. It's all there in the first parak, or the second parak, third parak. Yeah, it's all there. We all know it. There's a time for this, a time to bury, a time to be born, a time to die. Don't miss those times of simcha. That's a message that I take from Kohelet, having finally, after probably getting on for 40 years since I first looked at Kohelet and said, it's too difficult for me, this. I can't do it. Now, Baruch Hashem, we've got all those sources that if I can do it, I've got the same internet as you. I can do it. You can all do it. Go and find in your parak, go and find whatever touches you, whatever you find in that parak that inspires you. It's meant to be an inspiring book. It's not meant to make you miserable. Okay, because by the way, one of the questions we asked, I'm not going to answer it today, but we'll answer it hopefully when we come back together and do the summary, is what's it got to do with Sukkot? Why is Kohelet said on Sukkot? And I'm going to ask you if any of you have heard this explanation that I was always taught as a kid. And now I find it so uninspiring an answer and so wrong an answer. I'll go as far as to say that. I was told that Kohelet was put into Sukkot because Sukkot is Zman Simchatenu. It's the time of our joy. And in order not to be so joyous, the Chachamim introduced the miserable book of Kohelet to bring you down, and so that you shouldn't get carried away with your simcha. Anybody else heard that explanation as a kid? Yeah, there's a few people nodding in the room. Anybody on Zoom heard that explanation as a kid? You accept it. What a load of nonsense. It's completely the opposite. Completely the opposite. Kohelet is in Sukkot because it is about simcha, not because it's the opposite of simcha and to be a foil in case you get carried away with simcha. No, get carried away with your simcha. Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the Mishnah says, if you haven't seen that, you've never seen simcha in your life. Okay, that's what Kohelet is about. It's about chaparain, the simcha in your life. That's what I take it to be. Hannah is holding the art scroll Kohelet book. Now, that's the only one that was available to me in 1988 or whenever it was. I didn't find it particularly inspiring. There's much, for me, more inspiring and different things available. I suggest you all go out, choose your chapter, get in touch with your point person in the project, or Esti or Shoshana, or me if you have to, and tell us what you want to do. Learn it on your own. I recommend to do it together with somebody else if you can. Learning it on your own is more difficult. Do it together. Bounce ideas off one another. Make a chavruta 1 hour a week, a day, however you want to do it. Do it together. Take the parak that you've got, learn it, digest it, spit it out, and come and tell us all about it on Hoshana Rabbah. I'm going to stop at that point. I'm going to first of all ask if there are any questions in the room, and then I'm going to go and see if there are any questions in on Zoom. These are questions to do with Kohelet, not to do with the nuts and bolts, because when we ask questions about the nuts and bolts, I'll stop the recording so that we don't have extraneous material. Any questions or comments in the room about Kohelet? Yes, Philip.
No, it's a simple question about, I'd like to choose a chapter already.
Okay, that's not nuts and bolts. Talk to Esty. Okay, any question, any comments? Yes.
Talk about the breath. And it's written that God breathed into Adam. And it's like a connection to everything else you said.
I like that idea. When we spoke about the breath, HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathed the neshama into a person. That's why it's linshom, means to breathe. And what is that neshama? That neshama is the bit of us that chaps the simcha. I don't know whether a dog, a cat, a lion, a leopard feels simcha when he sees a child born, a cub born, or a kitten born. I don't know. I don't know. We can't really ask, can we? But I suspect that bit of neshama is or the other way around. I suspect the bit of us that appreciates that simcha and that feels that elevation is that neshama, which was breathed into us. So I think the connection there is a very strong one. That hevel and neshama, it's all that godliness in us. I think that's the point. It's the divine in us that enables us to do that. I agree with that. Any other comments or questions? Hannah?
Except for the famous song, Everything There Is a Time. But I would imagine also that Kohelet would speak of the sort of things that brings one joy and happiness. Having a trip to Chutz La'aretz or another car or a bigger house, I don't think would rank high in Kohelet.
Okay, let me just repeat that in case it wasn't heard.
Yeah, repeat it,
Hannah
please.
says that she doesn't think that Kohelet would think that a trip to Chutz La'aretz or another car or a bigger house would bring you to that simcha. And of course, that's absolutely right, because those are the things that he calls hevel. He says, I've amassed the most wealth. I've traveled the world, right? I've conquered this, I've conquered that. I've built this. He built the Beit HaMikdash even. I call hevel. You're right. What he is saying is that all of those things are hevel. He would agree, I think, with exactly what you've said, that the things that were bringing us to that simcha, and what do we hear at the end? By the way, there's not universal agreement that the end pasuk was written by Shlomo and that it was added on afterwards, perhaps. But what do we finish with? The last pasuk. Ki et kol ma'aseh, no, not that one. Sof davar, the end of the day. Hakol nishma, everything is heard. Et ha'elohim yara, fear God or be in awe of God. Ve'et mitzvotav shmor, keep his mitzvot. Ki zeh kol ha'adam. This is what it's all about. He tells you very clearly how to grasp those moments of simcha. He says the rest of it is hevel in the vanity sense of the word hevel, waste of time. The only thing that's really important is that simcha, true simcha, comes from Yireh Elokim and Shmirat HaMitzvot. Not entirely clear that Shlomo wrote that. There is an opinion that in order to make the book more acceptable to Tanakh, that some later author added that on to make it more clear at the end that this wasn't just a whole load of misery, but a lesson in how to live your life.
Well,
1 second,
It's-
Neville first.
Moments of sin that you talk about, when you experience that, it often promotes you to cry. And how it affects you, obviously, we cry at times of joy,
So Neville says that it's interesting that the times that we feel that moment of joy often brings us to tears of happiness. There's a very fine line between tears of happiness and tears of sadness. And the important part, of course, is that to recognize those tears of happiness comes from that same deep neshama, as you say. Yes, Philip.
Okay, joy, in my opinion, and I don't mean to be funny when I say this, is having a mentor and a carer. such as Johnny is to me.
Okay, let me go to Zoom. Is there anybody who would like to ask or make a comment on Zoom?
I would like to.
Okay, Elliot.
Okay. If you've ever learned Orcha Sadiqim,
We're
It
not
is a-
hearing you too well. Say it again.
have you ever learned Orcha Sadiqim, the Sefer?
Or Hatzadikim. No, I haven't.
It is a Sefer that balances midot, characteristics. The opposite of simcha is not sadness. It's worry.
That's very interesting. Elliot
he
said,
brings-
I'll repeat that for the room because it's a very interesting thing. So it says in Orat Tzadikim that the opposite of simcha is not sadness. The opposite of simcha, of joy, is worry. Wow, that's really interesting. That certainly
why-
chimes with me, Elliot. That certainly chimes with me. Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting observation. Anybody else on Zoom? Peter, I think you wanted to say something. Oh, we've lost Peter. Where's he gone? Oh, we've got another call.
May I ask a question, Hazel?
Hang on a sec. I've lost you a minute. 1 second. Let me get you back. There you are. Peter, did you want to say something, Peter?
Can you hear me?
Just about.
Okay, so my mother, who was fiercely secular all her life, wanted a quote from Kohelet on her tombstone.
What did she want?
She wanted a quote from Kohelet on her tombstone.
And which quote did you put?
Well, she actually requested there is a time and a season for everyone, for everything.
Okay. So let me just repeat that. Peter Barclay said that his mother, who was, his words, fiercely secular all her life, wanted a quote from Kohelet on a gravestone, that there is a time for everything and everybody. Everybody has their time. Everything has its time. Yes, I think Hazel, did you want to say something?
Yes, a very quick one, Rabbi. If one is preparing a chapter, does one have to, they won't know the chapters before, would one have to run through the whole of the Megillah to get into the chapter you have to prepare?
Yes, I think it would be worthwhile just reading a good translation, and I would recommend those of you who have, if you can see that, it is the Koren Sukkot Machzor. The Koren Sukkot Machzor by Jonathan, the commentary by Jonathan Sachs, Zatzal. I would suggest, for instance, if you're going to take chapter 5, I would suggest you read through the translations of chapter 1 to 4, and then delve into your chapter 5 to get the background. It doesn't have to be that translation. There are lots of translations online, but I've particularly found, as always with Rabbi Sachs, his translation is very, very accurate and to the point. Okay.
Thank you.
The first tab on the spreadsheet is resources, and it gives you a list of what Torah and.
Okay, so let me say that. So on the spreadsheet that is available on the group, there is a tab. There is a tab which will give you resources, including various translations and commentaries, which you can go into. Okay, I'm going to close up now because we've been going over an hour. And most people's concentration have gone by now, including mine. Let me stop the recording. Please get stuck into it. Come back on Hoshana Rabbah, and we will hear the fruits of your labor. Shavua Tov, Besorot Tovot.